You will choose a bride from these 5 families, or lose everything, the domineering rancher declared, his weathered finger pointing at his reluctant son surrounded by wealthy suitors in silk gowns. The townspeople whispered that the awkward heir would buckle under pressure, selecting respectability over rebellion. Everyone knew the fat black seamstress watching from the kitchen doorway was nothing more than hired help. They assumed he'd marry for alliance and abandon any foolish notions about the clever woman who mended their clothes while memorizing their secrets. But the seamstress possessed something none suspected, a brilliant mind that had been cataloging the financial scandals hidden in every wealthy family's laundry basket. As winter deepened and the ranch faced mysterious cattle deaths threatening everything, an impossible alliance would either save 2 unlikely hearts or destroy them both. Would the heir choose duty and inheritance, or trust the one person who saw the deadly conspiracy unfolding around them? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The winter wind cut through the Montana territory like a blade, rattling the windows of the Carpenter ranch house. James Carpenter stood in his father's study, staring at the ledger books that never seemed to balance. At 26, he preferred reading philosophy to branding cattle. His hands were softer than a rancher's son should have. Eli Carpenter slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Papers scattered across the polished surface. "You'll marry, and you'll marry well," Eli growled. "The Ashfords arrive tomorrow. Railroad money. The Sterlings bring banking connections. The Morgans have political influence." James closed the ledger. His jaw tightened. "I won't be sold like prize livestock. You'll do your duty to this ranch." Eli's weathered face hardened. 5 families, 5 daughters. Choose one by Christmas, or I sell every acre to the highest bidder. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. James knew his father meant every word. Eli had built this empire through ruthless determination. Sentiment held no value in his calculations. 3 miles away, Aria Winslow bent over her sewing table in the small cabin she shared with her grandmother. The lamplight flickered across fabric samples and thread spools. Her fingers worked quickly, mending a torn dress for Mrs. Henderson. Every stitch meant another penny toward her grandmother's medicine. Martha Winslow coughed from her rocking chair near the fireplace. The sound rattled deep in her chest. At 68, she carried the wisdom of someone who had survived slavery and Reconstruction. Her eyes still sharp despite her failing body. "That dress belongs to the banker's wife," Martha observed. "She tears the same seam every month, probably fighting with her husband about money." Aria smiled. Her grandmother taught her that clothes told stories. A loose button revealed weight loss from worry. Mudstains showed secret meetings. Expensive fabric with cheap thread exposed financial strain. "The Carpenter boy's shirts need taking in," Aria said. "He's losing weight." Stress, most likely. Martha's knowing look made Aria blush. The entire territory knew James Carpenter was handsome in a bookish way, but men like him didn't notice women like her. The townspeople made sure she understood her place. The next morning, carriages rolled up the winding path to the Carpenter ranch. Aria watched from town as the wealthy families arrived. The Ashford carriage gleamed with fresh paint. Railroad money bought the finest things. The Sterling coach followed, pulled by matching white horses. Banking influence demanded appearances. The Morgan family's political connections showed in their military straight posture. The Blackwood mining fortune rattled in jewelry and gold buttons. The Rutherford cattle empire brought the largest entourage. Aria delivered mended clothes to the ranch that afternoon. The kitchen buzzed with preparations for evening introductions. She moved quietly through the servants' corridors, invisible as always. Outside Eli's study, she paused. Voices carried through the heavy door. "The Ashford girl brings railroad partnerships," Eli was saying. But the Sterling daughter offers banking stability. I won't be forced into this, James replied. You'll choose or lose everything. Arya's mind raced. She pressed closer to the door. Morgan's girl has political connections that could protect us from territorial regulations, Eli continued. Blackwood mining money could fund expansion. Rutherford's cattle empire would dominate the entire territory. The pieces fell together in Arya's analytical mind. This wasn't about marriage. This was about power, territory control, economic dominance. She slipped away before anyone noticed her presence. That evening, the grand parlor filled with silk gowns and polished boots. James stumbled through introductions with each eligible daughter. His discomfort was obvious to everyone watching. Miss Ashford spoke only of fashion trends from back east. Miss Sterling quoted her father's banking philosophies. Miss Morgan discussed political strategies like military campaigns. Miss Blackwood bragged about her family's mining claims. Miss Rutherford evaluated the ranch's potential with calculating eyes. James escaped to the front porch after an hour of stilted conversation. The cold air felt like freedom compared to the suffocating parlor. Arya approached from the shadows. She had waited for this moment. You look miserable, she said quietly. James startled. Miss Winslow, I didn't hear you approach. I have a proposition. Arya stepped into the moonlight. Pose as your choice. Buy yourself time while I gather information about these families. Arya's voice was steady and confident. Through my tailoring work, I know their secrets. Real secrets. What secrets? The Ashfords are bankrupt. Railroad contracts dried up 6 months ago. They're hiding behind expensive clothes and borrowed carriages. Arya counted on her fingers. The Sterlings are under federal investigation for loan fraud. The Morgans owe gambling debts to dangerous people. James stared at her. How could you possibly know that? People tell their servants everything. Servants bring me clothes to mend. Clothes tell stories. Arya moved closer. A fake courtship gives you leverage, gives me respect. We both get what we need. The calculation was brilliant. James saw it immediately, but the social cost would be enormous. They'll destroy you, James said. The humiliation would be unbearable. Let me worry about that. Arya extended her hand. Do we have an agreement? James looked at her outstretched hand. Her skin was darker than his. Her dress was plain cotton instead of silk. Her figure was fuller than fashion dictated. But her eyes held an intelligence that none of the eligible daughters possessed. He shook her hand. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind them. Eli Carpenter emerged from the shadows, his face twisted with fury. Eli's boots scraped against the wooden porch. His eyes burned with cold fury as he stepped into the moonlight. The handshake between James and Arya had lasted only seconds, but Eli saw everything. Get inside, boy, Eli commanded. His voice carried the authority of 30 years building an empire. Now! James straightened his shoulders. We were just talking. About what? Eli's gaze shifted to Arya. She stood perfectly still, meeting his stare without flinching. Most people cowered under Eli Carpenter's attention. This woman didn't. Business arrangements, Arya said calmly. Your son has questions about territorial land policies. I know people who work in the courthouse. The lie came smoothly. Eli's eyes narrowed, but he couldn't find fault with her words. James nodded along, impressed by her quick thinking. Inside, Eli repeated. Your guests are waiting. James followed his father back into the parlor. Arya melted into the shadows like smoke. but the agreement remained solid between them. The next morning, Arya's cabin buzzed with activity. She spread newspapers across her kitchen table, each one marking dates and financial reports. Martha watched from her chair, fascinated by her granddaughter's methodical approach. "Tell me about the Ashfords," Martha said. "Railroad money, attempted repairs at home, instead of hiring a professional seamstress." "Mrs. Ashford brought this herself instead of sending a servant," Arya explained. "She counted every coin twice before paying. Her hands shook when she handed over the money." Martha smiled with pride. "You learned well. What about the others?" "The Sterling family's laundress quit last month. She told me Mr. Sterling burns papers every night. Government letters with official seals." Arya set down the dress. "People don't burn good news." She continued her analysis. The Morgan family's stable boy mentioned visits from rough men asking about debts. The Blackwood mining claims were tied up in territorial disputes. Each family carried secrets that could destroy their reputations. "And the Rutherfords?" Martha asked. Arya frowned. "They're different. Real money, real power, but something feels wrong about their timing." That afternoon, James visited Arya's cabin officially. The entire town watched as the carpenter heir knocked on the seamstress's door. Whispers spread like wildfire through the streets. "Miss Winslow," James said loudly enough for neighbors to hear, "I'd like to discuss a business proposition." Inside, away from prying eyes, James marveled at Arya's intelligence network. She had detailed financial information about each family spread across her table like a military campaign. "The Ashfords will be desperate for any connection to real money," Arya explained. "They might offer better terms than usual railroad partnerships." "You think like a businessman," James said with admiration. "I think like someone who needs to survive." Arya's voice carried steel underneath the softness. "My grandmother taught me to read people. Slavery doesn't end just because papers get signed. You learn to stay ahead or get crushed." James began understanding the depth of her strategic mind. This wasn't just about helping him choose a bride. Arya was playing a complex game with multiple moves ahead. The next evening brought the first formal dinner with all 5 families. Arya arrived wearing her best dress. The fabric was well made, but clearly not expensive. She walked into the dining room with quiet confidence. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Miss Ashford whispered behind her fan. Miss Sterling's mother gasped audibly. Miss Morgan's father demanded an explanation from Eli. The Blackwoods exchanged shocked glances. The Rutherfords watched with calculating eyes. "Surely this is a mistake," Mrs. Sterling announced. "This person cannot be dining with respectable families." Arya took her assigned seat without responding. James sat beside her, his presence a silent statement of support. Eli's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Miss Rutherford leaned forward with false sweetness. "Miss Winslow, isn't it? I understand you work with your hands. How quaint." Rutherford's smile never reached her eyes. "Tell us about your family background." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Everyone knew what she was really asking. Arya felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment. Martha's teachings echoed in her mind. Dignity under pressure, strength through intelligence. Never let them see you break. "My grandmother raised me," Arya said clearly. "She taught me that character matters more than circumstances, that intelligence can overcome any obstacle." "How inspiring," Mrs. Morgan said with obvious sarcasm. "And what obstacles have you overcome?" Arya smiled. The expression was warm, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Building a successful business from nothing, learning to read financial markets through careful observation, understanding that appearances often hide desperate realities. The last comment hit its target. Mrs. Ashford's face went pale. Mr. Sterling's hand trembled as he reached for his wine glass. Miss Morgan's political connections couldn't protect her family from gambling debts. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Mr. Blackwood demanded. "I mean that wise partnerships require understanding the truth behind public presentations," Arya replied smoothly. "Don't you agree?" The room fell silent. James watched in amazement as Arya turned their social attack into a demonstration of her analytical powers. She hadn't revealed specific secrets, but everyone understood she possessed dangerous knowledge. Morgan Rutherford studied Arya with new interest. His calculating expression suggested he was reevaluating her significance in his plans. Eli Carpenter observed the exchange with growing respect, despite his social prejudices. This woman had just outmaneuvered 5 wealthy families without raising her voice or losing her composure. The dinner continued with forced politeness, but the power dynamic had shifted. Arya Winslow was no longer invisible. The morning after the dinner, Arya found her usual clients canceling orders. Mrs. Henderson sent a note declining to pick up her mended dress. The banker's wife claimed she no longer needed alterations. 3 other families followed suit before noon. The message was clear. Associate with the Carpenter heir. Face social exile. Martha watched her granddaughter count the remaining coins in their savings jar. The amount wouldn't cover medicine for another week. "Maybe you should end this arrangement," Martha said gently. "Not yet." Arya's jaw set with determination. "They're scared. That means we have power." She was right. Word of the dinner conversation had spread through the territory like wildfire. Arya's veiled threats about hidden calculation. Like a predator reassessing prey that had shown unexpected teeth. That afternoon, James arrived at her cabin carrying supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and medicine for Martha. His gesture was both practical and symbolic. "You don't need to do this," Arya said. "Yes, I do." James set the packages on her kitchen table. "They're punishing you for helping me. That makes it my responsibility." Martha smiled from her chair. "Your young man has honor." "He's not my young man," Arya protested, but her cheeks warmed. James studied the financial documents still spread across Arya's table. Her analysis was more thorough than anything his father's business advisors had ever produced. "You missed something about the Rutherfords," James said. "Their timing is suspicious. Why approach us now?" Arya nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. Everyone else needs our money or connections. The Rutherfords have their own cattle empire." She pulled out a map of the territory. Red marks showed the locations of both ranches and the land between them. If they controlled both operations, Arya traced a line with her finger, they'd dominate cattle trading from here to Denver. "A monopoly," James breathed. "Worth millions." Arya's expression grew serious. "But they'd need to eliminate competition first." The next morning brought disturbing news. 3 of Eli's prize bulls were found dead near the north pasture. The ranch hands assumed disease, but the timing felt wrong. Healthy cattle didn't die without warning. Arya arrived at the ranch within hours of hearing the news. She ignored the stares from the other families still visiting and headed straight to the pasture. "What are you doing here?" Eli demanded. "Looking at your dead cattle." Arya replied bluntly. "May I examine them?" You're a seamstress, not a veterinarian. I'm someone who notices details others miss. Arya knelt beside the nearest carcass. Has anyone checked the water source? James joined her, following her line of reasoning. The creek runs through this section. They walked upstream together, leaving Eli puzzled, but curious. Arya stopped at a rocky outcrop where the water pooled before continuing downhill. There. She pointed to a slight discoloration in the water. That's not natural. James tasted the water carefully and immediately spat it out. Bitter. Metallic. Poison. Arya's voice was grim. Someone's contaminating your water supply. They followed the creek to its source and found evidence of tampering. Fresh shovel marks in the mud. Boot prints that didn't match ranch workers' boots. Someone had buried something upstream. Sewing work. In reality, she was gathering information about unusual activities. The blacksmith mentioned strangers buying poison for killing rats, large quantities. The general store owner recalled selling shovels and rope to men he didn't recognize. The hotel keeper described guests who paid cash and avoided conversation. Each piece of information formed a pattern. Someone was conducting secret operations throughout the territory. The cattle poisoning was just the beginning. Meanwhile, the pressure on James to choose a bride intensified. The 5 families demanded a decision by Christmas, now only 2 weeks away. Eli grew more desperate as cattle deaths increased. Choose the Sterling girl, Eli urged during a private conversation. Banking connections could provide emergency loans. The Morgans offer political protection, James countered, playing along while buying time. The Blackwoods have ready cash from mining claims. Neither man mentioned the Rutherfords, though Morgan Rutherford had been asking pointed questions about the ranch's financial stability. His interest seemed more like a predator circling wounded prey. Arya's investigation revealed the scope of the threat. The poisoning wasn't random vandalism. It was systematic sabotage designed to bankrupt the Carpenter Ranch. Someone wanted Eli desperate enough to sell at far below market value. 3 more cattle died over the weekend. Then 2 horses showed signs of illness. The contamination was spreading through multiple water sources. It's coordinated, Arya told James during a secret meeting in town. Multiple locations. Professional execution. This isn't some angry neighbor. Who has the resources for an operation this size? Before Arya could answer, Morgan Rutherford stepped out of the shadows behind them. His smile was cold and calculating. Miss Winslow. James. Having a private conversation? James moved protectively closer to Arya. Just discussing business. What kind of business? Rutherford's eyes never left Arya's face. I understand you've been asking questions around town. Curious questions about strangers and unusual purchases. Arya met his stare without flinching. I care about this community. Strange activities concern me. How admirable. Rutherford's voice carried a subtle threat. Of course, curiosity can be dangerous, especially for people in vulnerable positions. The warning was clear. Arya had gotten too close to the truth. Morgan Rutherford was behind the sabotage, and now he knew she was investigating him. As he walked away, Arya realized their fake courtship had become something much more dangerous. They weren't just playing games with social expectations anymore. They were exposing a conspiracy that could destroy everything Eli had built. And Morgan Rutherford would kill to protect his plans. Arya didn't sleep that night. Rutherford's threat echoed in her mind like a death knell. She sat by Martha's bedside, watching her grandmother's labored breathing and calculating their rapidly diminishing options. By dawn, she had made a decision that would either save them all or destroy everything. She needed to convince Eli Carpenter that his ranch was under attack, without revealing how she knew, without admitting to the investigation that could get her killed, without sounding like a desperate woman spinning wild theories. The solution came through Martha's wisdom. During the war, Martha said weakly. We had to warn the Underground Railroad about Confederate traps. Never could tell them directly. Too dangerous. Had to make them discover the truth themselves. Arya understood immediately. She couldn't present evidence to Eli. She had to guide him to find it himself. That morning, Arya visited the ranch under the pretense of delivering James's mended shirts. She found Eli in the barn, examining another sick horse with the veterinarian. Strangest thing I've ever seen, the vet was saying. Healthy animals don't just start dying like this. Could be the water, Arya said casually, hanging the clean shirts on a nearby hook. Both men looked at her with surprise. My grandmother remembers similar symptoms from her childhood, Arya continued. Back in Virginia. Someone was poisoning livestock to force land sales. Eli's eyes sharpened. What kind of poison? Something that leached into water sources gradually. Made it look like natural disease. Arya met his gaze steadily. They found evidence buried upstream. Took weeks to discover because it was so well hidden. The seed was planted. Eli's suspicious nature would do the rest. Within hours, Eli had organized search parties to examine every water source on his property. James joined the effort, secretly coordinating with Arya's intelligence network to guide searchers toward the most promising locations. They found the first cache by afternoon. Metal containers buried near a creek bend, slowly releasing toxic compounds into the water flow. The discovery sent shock waves through the ranch hands. This is deliberate sabotage, Eli announced to his foreman. Someone's trying to destroy us. More discoveries followed. 7 different locations. Enough poison to contaminate half the territory. The scope of the operation was staggering. Eli called an emergency meeting in his study. James attended, along with the ranch foreman and the local sheriff. Arya positioned herself where she could overhear through the kitchen doorway. Who has resources for something this elaborate? The sheriff asked. Has to be someone with serious money, the foreman replied. This took planning and professional execution. Eli spread maps across his desk, marking each poisoning location. The pattern formed a rough circle around his most valuable grazing land. They're targeting specific areas, James observed, the richest pastures, the breeding grounds. Into bankruptcy first. Arya held her breath as the men worked through the logic. They were so close to the truth. The Rutherfords approached us right when this started, James said slowly. Morgan's been asking detailed questions about our financial situation. Coincidence, Eli muttered, but his tone suggested doubt. The sheriff frowned. Worth investigating. I'll check if anyone's seen Rutherford men near your property. Over the next 3 days, evidence mounted against Morgan Rutherford. Ranch hands reported seeing unfamiliar riders near poison sites. The hotel keeper confirmed that Rutherford associates had been staying in town for weeks. The general store owner identified one of them as a recent shovel purchaser. But Rutherford was clever. All evidence remained circumstantial. Nothing directly linked him to the sabotage. Arya realized they needed definitive proof, something undeniable that would expose his conspiracy before he could eliminate the witnesses. The Christmas bride selection ceremony was only 5 days away. After that, Rutherford would either control the ranch through marriage alliance or destroy it completely. She developed a dangerous plan. You want to do what? James stared at her in disbelief. Catch him in the act, Arya replied calmly. He thinks we're getting too close. He'll try to accelerate the poisoning operation. They sat in her cabin while Martha dozed fitfully nearby. The medicine James had brought was helping, but her condition remained fragile. It's too risky, James protested. If he realizes you're watching him, he already knows I'm investigating. Might as well use that knowledge strategically. Arya spread fresh maps across her table. There are 3 water sources he hasn't contaminated yet. He'll hit those next. How can you be certain? Because I understand desperate men. Arya's voice carried bitter experience. When someone's cornered, they become predictable. James studied her plan with growing admiration and terror. She proposed using her network to monitor all 3 locations simultaneously. When Rutherford's men appeared, they'd have witnesses ready to document everything. What if something goes wrong? James asked. Then your father loses his ranch, and my grandmother dies without medicine. Arya met his eyes. We're already cornered. This gives us a fighting chance. That evening, Arya coordinated with her intelligence network. The blacksmith would watch the North Creek. The hotel keeper's son would monitor the East Pasture. The general store owner's brother would observe the South water source. Each volunteer understood the stakes. If Rutherford succeeded in destroying the Carpenter Ranch, the entire territorial economy would suffer. His cattle monopoly would control prices and squeeze out smaller operations. The trap was set for the following night. Arya positioned herself at the most likely target, the South Pasture Creek that fed the breeding area. She hid in the brush with a clear view of the water source, carrying paper and pencil to document whatever she witnessed. James wanted to stay with her, but Arya refused. His presence would be too conspicuous. Better that he remain at the ranch house, ready to alert the sheriff when evidence was secured. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Midnight came and went. Arya began wondering if her prediction was wrong. Then she heard horses approaching through the darkness. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, leading a pack horse loaded with metal containers. Even in the dim moonlight, Arya recognized Morgan Rutherford's distinctive silhouette. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched them work. Professional, efficient, deadly. They were burying enough poison to kill every animal within miles. Arya's hands trembled as she sketched the scene before her. 3 figures working by moonlight. Metal containers being buried upstream. Morgan Rutherford directing the operation with practiced efficiency. She documented everything: the exact location, the time, the methods they used. Even rough drawings of their faces in the pale light. One of the men looked directly toward her hiding spot. Arya froze, pressing deeper into the brush. Her heart stopped beating for several terrifying seconds. "Someone there?" the man called softly. Rutherford raised his hand for silence. They all listened to the night sounds. Crickets, wind through grass, nothing more. "Just nerves," Rutherford muttered. "Finish quickly." They completed their work within 20 minutes. The poison containers disappeared beneath dirt and rocks. By morning, toxic compounds would begin seeping into the water supply. Within days, every animal that drank from this source would sicken and die. Arya waited until their hoofbeats faded completely before moving. She marked the burial site with small stones, then ran through the darkness toward town. The sheriff lived above the jail. Arya pounded on his door until lamplight appeared in the window. "Sheriff Morrison, you need to come immediately." "Miss Winslow? What's wrong?" She thrust her documentation into his hands. "I witnessed the poisoning operation. Morgan Rutherford and 2 associates. They just buried containers at the South Creek." Sheriff Morrison dressed quickly while studying Arya's notes. Her detailed observations impressed him. Location markers, timestamps, physical descriptions. This was evidence that would hold up in territorial court. They rode back to the burial site with 2 deputies. Arya's stone markers led them directly to the freshly disturbed earth. The deputies dug carefully, uncovering 3 metal containers filled with toxic compounds. In town, multiple times. Dawn was breaking as they secured the evidence. The sheriff sent riders to arrest Rutherford and his conspirators. But when they reached the Rutherford camp, they found empty tents and cold campfires. Morgan Rutherford had vanished into the night. He knew, Sheriff Morrison said grimly. Someone warned him. Arya felt ice forming in her stomach. Rutherford was still free, still dangerous, and now he knew she could identify him. Her investigation had exposed the conspiracy, but failed to capture the conspirators. James met them at the ranch house as news spread. Eli emerged from his study, his face grim with understanding. "So it was Rutherford all along," Eli said. "Yes, sir," Sheriff Morrison confirmed. "Miss Winslow's evidence is solid. But he's gone." Eli looked at Arya with new respect. This woman had risked her life to save his ranch. Her intelligence and courage had exposed a conspiracy that could have destroyed everything he'd built. "Thank you," Eli said simply. The words carried weight beyond their simplicity. Coming from a man who rarely acknowledged anyone's worth, they represented a seismic shift in his thinking. But celebration was premature. Within hours, word arrived that Rutherford had sent messages to territorial authorities. He was claiming that Eli Carpenter had poisoned his own cattle as part of an insurance fraud scheme, that Arya Winslow was a co-conspirator, helping fabricate evidence. "Lies," James said angrily. "Convincing lies," Sheriff Morrison replied. "Rutherford has political connections, people who owe him favors. His version of events will get a hearing." Arya realized the danger had escalated beyond physical threats. Rutherford was using the legal system as a weapon. If his claims gained traction, she and the Carpenters could face criminal charges. "We need allies," Arya said thoughtfully. "People who can vouch for our character and motives." That afternoon, she implemented the final phase of her intelligence network. Every person she had helped over the past 2 years, every family whose clothes she had mended, every favor she had quietly performed without expecting recognition. The response overwhelmed everyone's expectations. The blacksmith testified that Arya had warned him about the strangers buying poison. The hotel keeper confirmed Rutherford's associates had been conducting suspicious activities for weeks. The general store owner identified the shovel purchasers from Arya's descriptions. More importantly, the other 4 families began distancing themselves from Rutherford. They had witnessed Arya's intelligence and integrity during the formal dinner. Her accurate assessment of their financial situations proved she possessed legitimate business insight. And Blackwood families admitted receiving offers to purchase territorial land once the Carpenter Ranch failed. The pattern became undeniable. Rutherford had planned to eliminate competition through sabotage, then consolidate territorial cattle operations under his control. But legal vindication would take weeks. The Christmas ceremony was tomorrow night. Eli still faced financial crisis from the cattle deaths. The ranch needed immediate solutions. James found Arya in her cabin that evening, working by lamplight while Martha slept. "My father wants to speak with you," James said, "about business arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "Partnership. Your intelligence network is more valuable than railroad connections or banking relationships." James sat beside her at the small table. "He wants to offer you a position managing ranch intelligence operations." Arya studied his face carefully. "And what do you want?" "I want you to marry me," James said quietly. "Not as part of some strategic arrangement, not to solve anyone's problems. Because I love your mind, your courage, your integrity. Your father will never accept that. He already has. James smiled. He told me any woman brave enough to face down Morgan Rutherford and smart enough to expose his conspiracy has earned the right to choose her own future. Arya felt tears forming in her eyes. 3 months ago, she was invisible to respectable society. Now the most powerful man in the territory was offering her partnership, and his son was declaring genuine love. But Rutherford was still free, still dangerous, still capable of destroying everything they had fought to protect. Tomorrow's ceremony would determine whether their victory was real or temporary. Christmas Eve arrived with crystal-clear skies and bitter cold. The Carpenter ranch house blazed with lantern light as families gathered for James's bride announcement. Despite the scandal surrounding Rutherford's conspiracy, territorial tradition demanded the ceremony proceed. Arya dressed carefully in her finest gown. The deep blue fabric complemented her dark skin, and the expert tailoring showcased her professional skills. She had made this dress herself, every stitch a statement of pride and defiance. Martha sat in her chair, breathing easier thanks to the medicine James had provided. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she watched her granddaughter prepare for a future that seemed impossible just months ago. "You look like a queen," Martha said softly. "I feel like I'm walking into battle," Arya replied. "Same thing sometimes." The remaining 4 families had arrived earlier that afternoon. The Ashfords, Sterlings, Morgans, and Blackwoods maintained polite facades, but their daughter's disappointment was obvious. They had come expecting to compete for James's hand, only to discover the contest was already decided. Eli stood at the front of the grand parlor, his weathered face. The transformation in his attitude amazed everyone who knew his previous prejudices. Crisis had revealed character, and Arya's character had proven unshakable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eli announced, "we gather tonight to witness my son's choice of bride." The room fell silent. Every eye focused on James as he stepped forward, handsome in his formal suit. His confidence had grown tremendously over the past weeks. Working alongside Arya had taught him to value intelligence over inheritance, courage over comfort. "Before I speak," James said clearly, "I want everyone to understand what happened here. Morgan Rutherford attempted to destroy this ranch through systematic poisoning of our livestock. His goal was to force bankruptcy, then consolidate territorial cattle operations under his control." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Some families looked surprised, others uncomfortable. Everyone had heard rumors, but James was making the accusations official. "The conspiracy was exposed through the brilliant investigation of Miss Arya Winslow," James continued. "Her intelligence network and analytical skills saved not only our ranch, but protected every cattle operation in the territory from Rutherford's monopolistic scheme." Mr. Sterling stepped forward. "Are you saying Miss Winslow conducted this investigation independently?" "I'm saying she organized and executed the most sophisticated intelligence operation this territory has ever seen," James replied, "using nothing but her tailoring business relationships and her exceptional analytical mind." The admission sent shockwaves through the room. These wealthy families had dismissed Arya as insignificant, only to discover she possessed capabilities that surpassed their own business advisors. Miss Ashford's father cleared his throat nervously. "The evidence against Rutherford is conclusive?" "Completely," Sheriff Morrison confirmed from the back of the room. "Miss Winslow's documentation and witness testimony will ensure his conviction when he's captured." Arya stepped forward, her chin raised with quiet dignity. She had endured months of ridicule and contempt from these people. Tonight, she would speak her truth. "I know what you all think of me," Arya said calmly. "The fat black seamstress who forgot her place, who dared to associate with her betters, who presumed to participate in affairs beyond her understanding." The room remained deadly quiet. "You were wrong about everything, except my skin color," Arya continued. "I built a successful business through intelligence and hard work. I exposed a criminal conspiracy that would have impoverished this entire territory. I earned the respect of a good man through merit, not manipulation." Mrs. Morgan shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Winslow, surely you understand the social complexities." "I understand that social complexities are excuses for prejudice," Arya replied firmly. "I also understand that circumstances are changing, and character matter more than bloodlines and bank accounts." James moved to stand beside her, his support unwavering. "Arya Winslow is the most remarkable woman I've ever met. She saved our family's legacy. She deserves our gratitude, not our condescension." Eli stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades building an empire. "Miss Winslow has proven her worth beyond any doubt. I'm honored to welcome her as my daughter and business partner." The words stunned everyone present. Eli Carpenter, known throughout the territory for his rigid social views, was publicly embracing a black woman as family. "Furthermore," Eli continued, "Miss Winslow will be managing our ranch intelligence operations. Her network and analytical capabilities give us advantages our competitors cannot match." Mr. Blackwood nodded slowly. "A wise decision. Miss Winslow's abilities are clearly exceptional." One by one, the other families offered their congratulations. Some genuine, others forced by social necessity. But the tide had turned irreversibly. Arya's intelligence and courage had earned recognition that social prejudice could no longer deny. As the evening progressed, conversations revealed the true impact of recent events. The Ashford family expressed interest in hiring Arya's intelligence services for their railroad negotiations. The Sterling banking connections could benefit from her analytical insights. Even the Morgan political machinery acknowledged her strategic value. Arya found herself transformed from social outcast to sought-after consultant. Her tailoring business relationships had evolved into a territorial information network, more valuable than gold mines or railroad contracts. Near midnight, James and Arya stepped onto the front porch for a moment of privacy. Snow fell gently, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. The crisis had passed, but their future was just beginning. "No regrets?" James asked softly. "About what? Choosing a bookish rancher over a quiet life?" Arya smiled, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I chose intelligence over ignorance, courage over comfort, partnership over prejudice. And love? Especially love." She took his hand. "The kind built on mutual respect and shared values." They stood together in the falling snow, 2 unlikely partners who had found each other through crisis and conspiracy. Behind them, the warm lights of the ranch house promised a future where intelligence mattered more than inheritance, where character trumped circumstances. Martha watched from the window.